Hello everyone, it's me, Aaron, Professor Thorgy, your guide to all things geeky, and welcome to a very special episode of Comic Class. You see, every single week on this channel, Comic Class is the show where we just geek out about comic books. However, Halloween is right around the corner. In fact, if you have not checked out this channel before, take a look around. We have actually been celebrating every single day this month with a brand new video talking about all things spooky and scary from our geeky obsessions. And today is no exception because today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite monsters from comic book history. Now, comics have a long history of dealing with monsters going back way before the boom of superheroes, but everybody's going to have their own definition of monster. In fact, for many people, the Hulk is a monster, and I can't really argue with them on that. So let me just go ahead and say, this is my list, and to me, a monster is something that's a little bit more horror themed, a little less superhero-y. To me, monsters are the thing that should make you feel uneasy. It's the thing that goes bump in the night, not the thing that saves the day. Now, before we actually get into the official top 10 list, let's go into a few honorable mentions. First up, Marvel's Zombies. This was one of the best zombie series I've ever read. In fact, it was even written by the creator of The Walking Dead before that series exploded. However, I felt odd putting an entire race of creatures on this list when every single one of them had their own unique personalities and was different from each other. I feel like if I'm going to put an entire race of creatures on this list, then all of them kind of need to be the same thing. I need to be able to look at them as a singular entity. So that's the only reason they didn't make it. Next, Fin Fang Foom. Out of all the giant Marvel monsters, of which there are many, Foom has remained the most popular and has managed to stick around to this day. However, since this is for Halloween, most of these creatures are meant to be creepy, and the moment that Foom comments on his own purple pants, the scare factor is kind of gone. Etrigan, a classic creature from DC's history with a very memorable design and personality, Etrigan deserves to be mentioned. However, while he was created to be a totally demonic monster, these days I tend to associate him more with superheroes rather than with horror, so that's why I had to keep him off the list. Next, the Minotaur from Kill the Minotaur. I love this series. I already did an entire episode spotlighting it, and one of the things that I love about is that it took the classic Greek myth of the Minotaur and mixed it with alien technology, and because of that, it almost has a alien xenomorph vibe going to it. It makes you feel less like you're trapped in this giant labyrinth and more like you're trapped in some weird dimension with a giant monster that just won't stop. The Minotaur is really creepy in this series. However, the series hasn't wrapped up yet, so I have yet to learn the big secret behind it. I have yet to see how it all plays out, so I didn't want to preemptively put him on this list when the final couple of issues could totally drop the ball and I would regret it. And lastly, there are tons of spooky creatures to come out of the old EC horror comics, none of which I'd put up here on this list since they were all just there for one issue, but just to give them all one big honorable mention, I'll just throw the Crypt Keeper himself up here as he greeted readers every single issue to Tales of the Macabre. Alright, now on to the official list. Kicking things off at number 10, Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night. Back in the 70s, Marvel experienced a massive resurgence in their monster comics. Some of them were more superheroic, like Ghost Rider, and some of them, like Dracula, existed mostly in their own monstrous world. But Werewolf by Night was that one character who threaded the needle between monsters and superheroes. The relationship between his human side and his werewolf side was halfway between a supernatural struggle and a secret identity. Whether he was facing off against the hordes of hell or actual superheroes, the Werewolf by Night provided readers with horror and adventures for years. Now, as I said, Werewolf by Night was part of Marvel's attempt to blend their horror side and their action side, but around the same time, they were also putting out their books that just dove headfirst into horror, and that's where number 9 comes in. Simon Garth, the Zombie. You might be wondering what makes him so special. I mean, there are tons of zombies out there. Exactly. That's the thing that makes zombies so scary. Their overwhelming numbers. So do you know how special you have to be famous as a single zombie? In fact, he's not even the modern era George Romero style zombie. He is the classic zombie. the voodoo zombie, a person who has a curse placed on them that forces them to walk the earth as the living dead. That is very unique in pretty much any medium, especially comics. But I also find Simon Garth to be an interesting character because most monsters are tragic stories. Characters who are decent people, but they are just cursed to have to live as these beasts. Simon Garth was a jerk. He was a wealthy businessman who was cruel to his employees, so they placed this curse on him to turn him into a zombie. Because of that, I didn't read his adventures going, oh, this poor man. Instead, I read it like, okay, let's see what creepy adventure this zombie gets into now. And it's because of all those reasons that I actually find him to be one of the more unique and interesting monsters in comic book history, and I always kind of get excited whenever creator wants to bring him back. However, you know what's better than a regular zombie? A superpowered one, and that's where Solomon Grundy comes in at number 8. Now, despite being an undying juggernaut, most people see him as being a bit goofy. Maybe it's the nursery rhyme that serves as his MO, and his speech pattern that makes Bizarro look well read, but when you actually dig into his history, he's rather creepy. A dead mobster buried in Slaughter Swamp and now returning as a brute that can never truly die? That's disturbing when you do it right. Grundy has a deep well of untapped potential for horror. Heck, I remember when I found the Easter egg for him in Arkham Knight, I froze up and expected to see him staying behind me when I turned around. But that was number 8, Solomon Grundy, whose initials are SG, and so is number 7, Shumo Garoth. I swear to you, I did not arrange this list just so I could make crappy segues from one to the next. It just kind of worked out that way. Shumo Garoth represents the old gods mythology on this list, reaching into far-out Lovecraftian imagination. Shumo Garoth doesn't just look freaky, he is a monster that will take your soul and enslave your mind. In a Doctor Strange storyline from last year, he wasn't even the villain, he just had a small cameo where it was revealed he was raising an entire civilization on his body just so they would sacrifice their children to him. That's more messed up than almost anything else on this list. Number 6 is Morbius the Living Vampire. Originally a doctor studying how to cure his own rare blood disease, Morbius became one of the most unique monsters in comic book history when his transformation was caused by science, not magic. But also because Morbius is perhaps one of the most tragic figures on this list. He's not evil. He's not a criminal. He's a good man who wanted to do something positive. But now he must fight to keep his humanity every single day as the endless hunger of being a vampire is always trying to take him over. Now, we've seen vampires like this in fiction before, but they usually give in to their curse. But with Morbius, he's always going back and forth between hero and villain. And because it was a curse of science and not magic, you always get that sense that maybe, just maybe, a cure is still out there that could turn him back into a man, and that keeps you rooting for him. Next at number 5 is Hellboy. Now, I'll be honest with you. I had to wonder if I should really put him on this list because, sure, he's a demon destined to end the world, but he's far more human than any other monster on this list, and he's more of a superhero than a creature from a horror comic. But Mike Mignola has created some of the most impressive comic book monsters in recent history, and I knew I had to put one of them on this list, but I couldn't decide which one I wanted to give a spot to because, well, they're all really darn impressive. I mean, I'm a big fan of his take on Frankenstein, but at the same time, look at Sadu Him. He makes Shumo Garoth look dapper by comparison. Or the Frog Monster. They're simple, but memorable, which is what makes them such an impressive creature. So I chose Hellboy because he's the unofficial representative of all things that go bump in the corner of Mignola's mind. At number 4 is the Man-Thing. He's partly here because he's got such an iconic look, with the blank dead red eyes that look hollow but sad and angry at the same time, and those vine tentacles on his face that serve no real purpose other than being creepy. And he's partly on this list because despite being a fairly isolated creature, he serves as the guardian of the nexus of all reality. Kind of a big deal. But the main reason that he got on this list is because of his tagline: "Whoever knows fear burns at the touch of the Man-Thing." Yes, if you feel fear, then just touching Man-Thing will cause you to burst into flames. Just think about that. The whole point of monsters is to scare you. But if you're scared of Man-Thing, you die. So remember kids, if you're walking through an old swamp in Florida and you run into a giant moss monster, be brave. I'm kidding, that's impossible. Number 3 comes from Lock and Key, my personal favorite horror comic of all time, The Black Door Demons. Throughout Lock and Key, you follow 3 kids going through an old house finding keys, and these keys open doors that change these kids as they walk through them. Now, I don't want to spoil anything about this series, but slowly you start to learn about the keys' origin, the weird dimension that they came from, and the creatures that inhabit that dimension, and what happens when they possess humans. You've seen possessions before, but these creatures turn you into monsters. Pure evil demons with no hint of humanity left, and that is terrifying. And when you realize there is an entire dimension full of them, full of your worst nightmares and of pure darkness made flesh, and they want to come to our world and take us over, that truly deserves to be on this list. And at number 2, ManBat. There's something very primal about the fear you get from ManBat. He's just a man that turns into an animal. That's a myth that has kept people up at night for centuries. But ManBat takes that and brings it into a modern city that still has classic gothic horror settings. He's a great blend of old horror with a new twist, and he serves as the perfect doppelganger to Batman, a twisted reflection of the hero that we follow. I know it might seem strange to put ManBat this high on the list, but he hits so many different notes of classic monsters without feeling like a throwback. He's a perfect blend of werewolves, vampires, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Plus, he has one of the best jump scares in video game history. And at number 1, Swamp Thing. I'll admit, when I was a kid, I thought Swamp Thing was kinda goofy. All I knew about him was that he was a big plant guy that lived in the swamp. But when I looked into it, he is one of the most shocking, but also fascinating monsters in comic book history. Originally, he was a scientist who got covered in chemicals, caught on fire, and then ran into the swamp where he bonded with the plant life. Okay, pretty creepy, but not top 10 monsters creepy. But then a plucky young writer by the name of Alan Moore came in and redefined him into one of the craziest and trippiest characters in comic book history. He revealed that Swamp Thing wasn't a man at all. The man died that night in the swamp, but the plants came to life and absorbed his memories. This whole time, he had been a plant that thought he was a man. This led to a real freaky few years with Swamp Thing having to ask, what is humanity? What does it mean to be a person? Which is a question that many classic monsters have raised. But from there, he continued to evolve, learning that the whole plant world was alive and he wasn't just any normal monster, he was an elemental creature that could travel through the green, the embodiment of all plant life. And that is what really gets him this high on this list. All the adventures he went on from this point. He went to space and bonded with living mechanical plant viruses. He traveled to the edge of reality and fought the embodiment of all evil alongside demons and gods. And when he wasn't doing that, he was fighting vampires, ghosts, werewolves, and just crazy hitchhikers. And that's what makes Swamp Thing the number 1 monster in comics. The creativity that went into him, the bizarre adventures he experienced that took readers through the worlds of madness, and the fact that for many years he served as our guide to everything from the darker, terror-filled side of the DC universe. And I hope I was able to serve as your guide today to these classic comic book monsters. Let me know who your favorite comic book monsters are in the comments below, or on Twitter and Tumblr at Professor Thorgy. Also, if you want some more Halloween goodness from me, then make sure that you click that subscribe button because we're not done celebrating THORGIWEEN yet. We've still got a whole week left to talk about all things spooky from the world of comics, video games, and movies. So if you want to see those videos, then make sure that you come back next time, and as always, happy Halloween.